Hi, Suranjan. Welcome to the podcast. How did they get there? Do you mind quickly introducing yourself to our listeners?
I am Suranjan Ghosh. I work as the Global Operations Director for a division within Morgan Advanced Materials. Morgan Advanced Materials is a FTSE 250 company. It's about 156 years old, and it's been applying its science in looking at how material science can be applied in making a difference to the world and its use of efficient resources. I've been in the company for a year.
Mhm.
Prior to that, I was working in Johnson Matthey, and prior to that in ICI, yeah, 20 odd years through that. But the thread that's been through my career has been operations.
Nice. And one question, I always love asking our interviewees is, do you love what you do?
I do. I think my kids kind of say um, they're not sure whether I love them more than I love my job or the other way around. But I think it's. So I often tell people, you've got one chance in this life,
Mhm.
right? Um, the one thing that all of us will eventually do is die, and so how are you going to ensure that you are using this time on earth in the best way that you can? And if people are not happy doing what they're doing, even within my organization, I actively urge them to go and do something that they love doing, because um, when they finish life and look back, they're going to remember all the things they didn't do rather than all the things they have done. So, short answer to your question, do I love my job? I definitely think I do.
I think that's great to know. Uh, what led you to your current position? Because I'm sure when you graduated from college, did you expect that this is where you would get to?
So, I did not have an aspiration for a position.
Yeah.
So, if anyone told me when I was in university, when I started working, would I get to where I was getting? I don't even think I realized I could get to where I was getting.
Hmm.
Right? Um, I think I always had an innate curiosity, and so I would constantly want to learn. Um, and I think I always wanted to excel in what I did. And um, things have happened, and some of them were decisions I made. Some of them were decisions that were made for me,
Hmm.
and this is how I got here. So I wish I could say that it was a charted journey, but I don't think it was.
I think really it is for anybody, right? And what inspired you to be, because you've been in the chemical engineering domain since the start of your career, right? And from your bachelor's to now, which is an achievement on its own, because not a lot of people manage to stay on that path. So, what motivates you, or what inspired you to get into this domain?
Okay. So I wanted to be a chemical engineer because I loved chemistry, I
Mhm.
loved maths and physics. It was like, here's an engineering degree that would allow me to use chemistry, maths, and physics. So that's how I got into chemical engineering. If someone had told me some of the advanced maths that I would be using, I may not necessarily have gone into it, but there you go. Um, when I came out of university, I was lucky enough to get a job with ICI, which was a big chemical company, kind of like a stalwart chemical company, I would say. And ICI had this really good thing as its management training scheme. They sent you for 2 weeks in a factory. They sent you for 2 weeks in a commercial stint where I had to sell rubber chemicals in some um, how would I word it? Some dodgy rubber chemical factory, some rubber using factories in India, where people were making Hawaii chappals, so
Mhm.
kind of flip flops. Um, and then they gave us a 2 week stint in any function that we would choose. And I chose business development. But those two week stints were really useful because right at the beginning, I got to experience life selling stuff. I got to experience life making stuff. I got to experience kind of business development. And I realized, um, so it sounds really sad, but I love a factory. because stuff gets made.
Yeah.
You can see things happening. You start with an input and you have all these processes and you get this output. And the output that you make goes through all these different parts of the world. So um, perhaps it was a fascination for making stuff that got me being in the industry that I have been. So even today, put me in a factory and I see input being converted to output, and I'm happy as a child.
I think that's really fascinating. And you've been through different job roles and you moved countries. What do you have to do, on what you have done to continue to learn and adapt to the changing culture and the changing requirement for the business?
Okay. Um, so I do kind of sometimes speak to graduates and stuff like that. And one of the things I tell them is your success is very much dependent on how you're able to manage transitions.
Mm-hmm.
So your transitions are when you go from one thing to another thing, right? Or when you're spanning a boundary. And the boundaries that you will have to span in a career are a functional boundary. So going from operations to technical to maybe a project or an IT related. So when it's a functional change. The other boundaries that you will have to span include, or transitions you'll have to do, is what I call as cultural.
Mm-hmm.
You will go from being in one organizational culture to another organizational culture. You could be from one national culture to another culture. The other thing that I often say is when you go from being a person who does stuff
Mm-hmm.
to being a manager where you're managing people who do things. That's another big transition. And I often tell them that's the toughest transition that you will ever have to do, which is going from doing to managing people who manage the results. So the key thing that I think one has to learn is having the ability to span boundaries and make the transitions. And for that, the things that have helped me is that innate curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
I like to learn. I like to figure out how things are working. I like to talk to people. I like to talk to people, absorb information, read books. And then the more I learn, the more I then make my own model of how I think things should work.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's apply, learn, reflect, kind of like a plan, do, check, act.
Yeah.
Just keep refining that over and over again. So I think actively seeking ways of getting beyond your boundary
Yeah.
is something that will help you, because the more you do it, the more you learn, the more you learn, the more comfortable you get.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think that's really interesting. Um, and you've come from India. You did your bachelor's in India at IIT, and a lot of engineers, at least I've seen through my own circle of friends as well. They do their bachelor's and they either go and start working for an IT company, or they go and do the MBA even before they actually gain any experience. And I was very interested and impressed to see that you actually waited 10 years after your bachelor's to actually do your MBA. And what led you to actually follow that other path? Because sometimes there's a trend, especially in India, that we see about following this mass path that everybody just goes down.
yes. So many people do ask me this question, including quite a few graduates. I wish I could tell them that I had planned to do my MBA after 10 years, but that wasn't the case. So let me kind of deconstruct the question.
Yeah.
So after doing 4 years of engineering and having gone through all the lectures and learned all these wonderful things of thermodynamics and chemical kinetics and so on and so forth, I felt I owed it to myself that I should go and do a job to see whether what I learned could be applied,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then I went into the industry, and then I learned that of all the things that I had learned, the proportion of things that I was really applying was not as much.
Yeah.
Right? I jokingly said, in my first 3 years of doing a job, I don't think I used more than 10% of my actual chemical engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But I think what I learned was there is what I would call as the hard stuff, which is the science, the technology, the machines, which tend to operate with the laws of physics and
Yeah.
maths and chemistry. And then there is people, which don't necessarily follow laws by itself, right? There is a level of uniqueness. And in any job, it's being able to understand the hard stuff as well as the soft stuff.
Yeah.
So, and then I got opportunity to move countries. I took that. And then I got an opportunity to move functions. I got an opportunity to become run about, at that point, I was a plant manager. So I was running about 7 different plants. And so because those things were filling up my desire for knowledge and learning, I was relatively comfortable. And now I had read about marketing and I'd read about finance. You go for these finance for non-finance courses and you learn stuff. But I realized I needed a grounding of going through an MBA. And I did think about whether I should do a master's in operations management or should I kind of do an MBA. And I did an MBA because I thought it would make me more rounded. So I did it after 10 years. There were, I still to this day, I keep telling people, if anyone tells you doing an MBA while you're working is tough, it's actually tougher than you think it is tough. Right? So, and it was really, really tough. But at the same time, you also had a job in a leadership position.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to be blessed by having my first child.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that I learned is doing those 3 things simultaneously set me up for anything else life had to throw for me. Right? So if someone asked me, what did I learn from an MBA? I learned stuff, but what I really learned was doing an MBA, having a child, and doing my leadership position was the toughest gig I've had.
I think that's great, and it also shows that you went in there actually going in to learn as well, with understanding what you wanted to do, and yeah, I think that's not necessarily true with a lot of people when they try to look at courses after bachelor's, but I think I've felt the same with mine because I did my master's while working full time, and I did it as a part-time degree as well. And I learned, I think, a lot more in that because I wasn't worrying about trying to search for a job while doing my degree. So your focus is then actually about learning. So moving on to a second part. Is there a book or that you've given most as a gift, or 1 to 3 books that have most influenced you?
Right. This is an easy one because the book that I give most as gifts is called The Goal by Goldratt. I mean, anyone tells me, I would say that's the best book ever from a manufacturing, but also kind of from a life perspective. Because you face complex problems, your job is to distill it down to its core essence and break it down. So The Goal is the book I give to most people. If you ask me what are my top 3 books in manufacturing, I would say I'd start off with The Goal, and then I'll go to the Lean Thinking by Womack and Jones, and then I would do The Toyota Way by Jeffrey Liker. I do it in that order because I think it helps people kind of understand cause and effect and how Toyota came into doing things the way it did.
Yeah.
Outside of manufacturing, I mean, as you can see, I have loads of books. I don't know. I think a book that helped me a lot was one by Marshall Goldsmith, which said, "What got you here won't get you there." So the things that have made you to being you are not may derail you from taking the step to the next level. And that was really profound for me when I moved from a manager to being a director. That was really useful. So there you go. Those are the books.
Great. No, I think that's interesting because very rightly said that you also need to have the characteristic to unlearn the things that you have sometimes learned to become better at things.
Absolutely.
So, talking about manufacturing, and you've been in industry for so long, is there a specific failure or an apparent failure that has set you up for later success, or a favorite failure that you have?
The gig that if someone asks me what's been my biggest challenge, and I can't call it a failure because I wouldn't be who I am today if I didn't go through that process.
Yeah.
Let me call it that way. So perhaps I failed, we failed in delivering what we were supposed to deliver, but I think the process had the biggest impact on me. So I think it was in 2014, so God, nearly about 6-7 years back. Suggested. I was seeking a challenge, and I went and did it was a business project role. So it was like a SAP rollout, so kind of like a systems job. And I remember the first time I said, okay, fine, I want a challenge, and this is a challenge that people were giving. A lot of people came to me and said, you are out of your, you're being barking mad if you're going to go out from operations to do a systems implementation.
Yeah.
So we'd set ourselves some targets. We didn't meet those targets, but I think what I learned the most was about myself and what I like. So I learned that I like seeing tangible outputs.
Yeah.
So even if it is like, there is a widget that's going out of the gate, that's a tangible output, right?
Yeah.
With business systems, the only tangible output is a screen.
Yeah.
And someone's using it, and at the end of it, a printout comes off. So I realized something tangible is very important for me.
Yeah.
But what I also realized is, having gone through that, I understood the nuts and bolts of a business. So I understood the sales order processing. I understood the whole mechanics of how we go from order to getting the cash from the customer, how we go from procurement all the way to paying them, how we're going from manufacture, from planning for the manufacture to the actual triggers to works orders and stuff like that. So getting to learn the nuts and bolts of the system was so useful, because now I can go and do any job.
Yeah.
And because I have the basic fundamentals of how a business process works,
yeah,
I am able to quickly assimilate and understand. So was it a failure? If you had asked me in 2016, 2017, I would have said, yeah, I didn't deliver to my targets. But today, when I reflect, I think that was perhaps the making of me, because I wouldn't be in the job that I was doing if I hadn't gone through that.
Right. Anyway, do you have an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love?
So this desire to learn. My kid's gonna call me Mr. Wikipedia, because that's the website I can go to most of the often, and I can just keep going from one topic to another. But and then when I go into deep concentration, I don't know this, but people tell me I kind of stick my tongue out. So they know that I am in the zone when they know that my tongue has come out. So what's my weirdest habit? I think learning about stuff and going from one topic to another on Wikipedia. But when I'm doing it, I'm in my zone, I stick my tongue out. So go figure.
So that's when people know not to disturb you.
Or they come and ask me, what are you thinking about? Because there must be something.
Do you have any learning or principles that you still carry from school or college?
Ooh. So, I mean, there are a few things that I ask myself. So, I mean, there was a quote which my dad used to use a lot, which is, good is not good from where better is expected. Right? And so often when I do something, I will ask myself, am I giving it my best? And if I'm not giving it my best, I should not feel disappointed with the outcome, because I know I had more in my tank. So the flip side of doing it is, what do I try and carry out is when you're doing something, try and give it your everything. Right? Because if you're not giving it your everything, you're holding back.
Yeah.
And if you're holding back, then you don't need the world to beat you up. You've already beaten yourself up.
Yeah.
If that kind of makes sense. So yeah, give it your best, and yeah, the rest is not up to you.
Absolutely. I think that's a principle that I like to follow as well, because you can't help but decide the outcome, but all you can do is give it your best shot, and then everything that follows is everything happens for a good reason, and somehow
Absolutely.
that's worked out for me up till now.
Yeah.
uh, so you've been through across countries and across different companies. Is there a stereotype that you hear, or a bad advice in your profession?
Uh, uh, uh,
It could be
I
in your domain, or even in engineering in general.
so it's I think human beings. So there's this fast thinking, slow
Yeah,
thinking, and it's easy to stereotype, right? It honestly is. I mean, I can crack a lot of engineering jokes about myself, but no,
yeah,
I think the key thing that I keep telling people is, listen, you are unique, right? There is no one who has your genetic makeup, and there is no one who has gone through life as you have gone through,
hmm,
right? So you are unique, and so you have the choice to decide how you want to move forward, right? Don't focus on that uniqueness and embrace that,
hmm,
rather than try and be reacting to what the world thinks you should do or shouldn't do.
yeah,
So it's not a stereotype. I think stereotyping is people trying to pigeonhole you into boxes.
yeah.
But the truth is you're unique. So there is no, the only box that fits you is the box that was made for you by you. So you decide how you want to make your box, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it does, and I think it absolutely does. And you're working even in the COVID times. You're busy. Then there's so much going on. Do you ever feel overwhelmed or unfocused at any point in the day? And if you do, what do you do to bring that focus back in?
Um, there are a few things. So the first one is, at my level or at my position, sometimes there are I am interacting with people who look up to me,
Hmm.
and are expecting me as a leader to be able to help navigate us through the problem. And so I go back to, like, am I giving it my best,
Hmm.
so that when this person is looking up to me, they are kind of getting what I want out of them.
Yeah.
So in a way, am I living up to the standard that other people aspire of me, if that makes
Hmm.
sense? Um, the other things, so that's one thing, but I think other things that help is breathing.
Hmm.
So I sometimes breathe in and out with a particular, so breathing exercises. But I also say, um, in a week I have to go and hit my cross trainer, because if I don't hit my cross trainer at least twice or three times a week,
Hmm.
I know I can see myself getting stressed. So
Yeah.
exercise is a form of stress relief.
Yeah.
Sounds horrible, but sounds horrible. My kids love it. So cooking in the weekends is one of my ways of de-stressing.
Yeah.
And yeah, so uh, you have to have mechanisms where you're letting off steam.
Nice. I might have to take some recipes of you as well then.
Well, I go to YouTube, man, the internet.
uh, so, knowing what you know today, if you had the opportunity to instruct your younger self, what would that be?
Oh, take more risks.
Hmm.
Take more risks. So I think people underestimate how long that they will work,
Yeah.
right? So if you assume someone works from about 25 to 65, that's a 40-year span.
Hmm.
Um, and so my advice to my younger self would be, take more risks, especially during the younger time,
Yeah.
because the worst that will happen is you'll fail,
Yeah.
but you will learn so much, right? So yeah. And
Absolutely.
even though people look at me and they think, wait, you took risks,
Yeah.
but I would say just take more risks. You've got one shot at life. Just
Absolutely.
go.
And in the current situation, in the COVID times, we have students who are graduating right now, and professionals who might be getting laid off, and they might need to reskill or pivot industries and their careers. Um, what would be your advice to, firstly, the graduates looking to join your manufacturing or the engineering sector, and then to the professionals?
Wow. Hmm. So there are a few thoughts that are going through my mind. So this
Yeah,
is not going to be a structured answer, but I
that's
think
all
there
right.
will be a thread that I will draw through it, right? So, so when I was doing my MBA was kind of the time that the financial crisis happened, right?
Mhm.
And when you're going through it at that point, I kind of felt, oh my God, like this is like the world is crashing down on us, and so on and so forth. But the truth is, as much as you may feel that we are in unprecedented times where you've had a global pandemic, you've had the biggest crash since 1929, and all these things put together, the truth is you are in a unique situation because you are being given the opportunity to learn from
Mhm.
these unique set of circumstances. Uh, you may not have a job, you may be having to pivot, but you need to do what is best for you,
Mhm.
right? So don't expect me to tell you or tell anyone what is best for them. They need to do what's best for themselves.
Mhm.
But if I then put it in perspective of you will have a 40-year career if you're a graduate, or perhaps 10 years left or 20 years left if you're a professional in the middle of their career, that's 20 years,
Mhm.
right? That's a long time. 20 years back, people were talking on Y2K,
Yeah.
right? We were still having a 5.25-inch discs,
Mhm.
right? The world changes.
Yeah.
So my advice to people is, okay, here's what I will say. Um, you can you can define the measure of a person by whether they resist change, they accept change, they embrace change, or they surf the winds of change.
Mhm.
And whilst you are in a position now where there's a maelstrom of change and you feel as if you are in no control, this is the time where you want to think, do I want to resist it and be a rock and maybe you are pushed aside?
Mhm.
Or do I want to kind of accept it? Do I want to embrace it? Or do I surf the winds of change? And I would steer you towards saying that the more you get towards surfing the winds of change, the better positioned you will be for the future. So, what's my advice? Embrace it, accept
Yeah.
it, relish it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I think that will be. I think our listeners would absolutely, take on that advice as well. So, Suranjan, I think it's been great just discussing your views and understanding, how your career journey has been. So, you've discussed about, how you got up to here. Where do you want to get to from here?
Oh. So there are. So the first thing you have to measure, what is the yardstick you will use to measure yourself,
Yeah.
right? So it's interesting that a few years, 3 years back, so there's a beautiful article by How Will You Measure Your Life?
Mhm.
Today, Christensen, really useful. But I, coming from an Indian background, I kind of reflected, we were taught about success being rising in your profession and so on and so forth. Do well academically, it opens up opportunities and so on and so forth. Um, I think success for me today is having a positive impact on people's lives,
Mhm.
right? And so the way I measure my success is how much of a positive impact am I having on other people around me.
Mhm.
And the people around me could be my family, it could be my community, it could be the people I work with as my colleagues,
Mhm.
or it could be people who potentially listen to this podcast whom I've never met before.
Yeah.
Am I having a positive impact on them?
Mhm.
So that's my yardstick these days. Um, I am sure there may be some career focused people who will measure their yardstick by designations or the size of their pay packet
Yeah.
or the car that they drive. Um, I can say that used to be important.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think it's not important, but for me, the importance is less. I think my ability to positively impact people more obviously rises as I rise within the organization,
Yeah.
but I think the quality of the impact is no less. So, yeah. Um, what's my measure of success? These days, it is, am I positively impacting people? I suspect I can add on to that by saying also the planet, because I do
Yeah.
think climate change is a big thing, but I haven't yet figured out how I personally want to change that. But the little bit that I can do,
Yeah.
I'm doing.
Great.
So,
No, I think that's amazing to know, Suranjan. And thank you for being part of this podcast. Before we end, is there any last words you want to share?
Um, ooh, I hadn't prepared for this. Um, I think I will go back to the thing that each one of you are unique. There is no one who has your genetic composition. There is no one who's been through life in the way that you've been life. So you are in a unique position. Um, Learn from others, but you need to chart your destiny, because one day when time goes on, you will pass away. And before you pass away, you will look back at your life. And all I would say is ask yourself, when you look back on your life, are you going to smile and say, I lived my life to the fullest? Or are you going to say, there were a few things I could have done more or differently? And so just live life, enjoy it, embrace it, relish it. Yeah, and if people want to be in touch, I'm more than willing to give my time to positively impact them if it's a positive impact.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Absolutely. And I'll share those details as part of the podcast as well. So,
Absolutely.
Suranjan, thanks a lot for being part of this initiative as well. And it was lovely speaking to you. Hey, listeners, hope you enjoyed the episode. Would love to hear your feedback in the comments section. And if you enjoyed it, please subscribe.